Scotland's First Folios. When will we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? These familiar words are from Macbeth, one of Shakespeare's best-known plays. The play only survives because it was printed 400 years ago in the first edition of his complete works, the volume we call today the First Folio. This film tells the story of 3 copies of that First Folio, all here in Scotland, held in publicly accessible collections. They're safe from thunder, lightning, rain, and anything else that might damage them. They will all be on display in 2023, and all with stories to tell. At the heart of the University of Glasgow's copy are comments by someone who saw Shakespeare's own company perform some of his plays. They wrote their reviews in the book. The Merry Wives of Windsor, very good. The Two Gentlemen of Verona, stark naught. In Edinburgh is a copy which has been carefully preserved in Scotland for at least half of its life. First, by a Miss Clark of Dunbar, described by Robert Burns as a clever woman with tolerable pretensions to remark and wit. Then, by the Society of Antiquaries, and finally, by the National Library of Scotland, where it now lives. You might not think a Scottish island a likely home for a First Folio, but one has travelled from early editors to a family of collectors on the Isle of Bute, where at Mount Stuart it gives local school pupils a taste of Shakespeare's plays as first printed. Truly a local treasure. This film tells why this one book matters so much, and shows the different lives these copies have led. It tells of the work that has been done to keep them readable today, so that Shakespeare's words, stories, and characters can inspire and endure for current and future generations to enjoy.
Our First Folio, it's a relatively recent arrival in the National Library, but it's been in Scotland for more than half of its existence. When you do a job like mine, you see a lot of very rare books and you see a lot of older books, and I'm not going to say you get blasé about it, but you certainly get used to them. But there are some books that you will never not get a thrill out of seeing, and that is definitely one of them. We think it was rebound by the Society of Antiquaries, and it's a really lovely 18th century binding, but it means a lot of the earlier information about that book has been lost. Ours doesn't have a lot of writing on it or annotations, but it does show a lot of evidence. You can tell just by, you can see the thumb marks on the pages, you can see where people have held a candle over maybe some wax has dripped, or a spark has landed on the page, so you can see that it's been a very well-read book. The portrait page was damaged, and as part of the repairs, Shakespeare's eye was damaged, and as part of the repairs, someone has coloured it in. So it's not a really beautiful engraving to start with, I think. And I think the way they fixed it makes him look like he's looking at you with a very sinister expression. You have these plays which only exist in the First Folio. It's like, well, this is the first time those words ever appeared. This is the first time All the World's a Stage ever appeared in print. This is the first time If 'Twere Done Well, When 'Tis Done, Then 'Twere Done Quickly, and When Will We Three Meet Again appear on the page. These famous lines and these famous characters, these famous stories. And in fact, without the First Folio, they may not have survived because they weren't printed separately. They're exciting texts to read, and they're exciting texts to see performed. And I wouldn't say that there is something, you can only appreciate Shakespeare if you see the First Folio. You can appreciate Shakespeare if you see your local school putting on a production of Shakespeare. You'll see something in that you like. But it all comes back to this one volume. That's what makes it special.
This copy of the First Folio is used quite actively in teaching and research. There was some wear and tear to the page edges, so We had things like some unstable tears, some losses to page edges that were quite high risk of incurring additional losses, some areas where the paper was very thin and weak and had some old historical repairs on that were actually now causing damage to the leaves. What this treatment has really focused on is a kind of risk reduction exercise. It's not a process of restoration. We're not trying to take it back to how it once was, or trying to remove any signs of use or stains or anything like that. But it really is just supporting it to provide that kind of safe usage.
What's fantastic about our copy is it's got contemporary annotations in it, and that's what I love about any of our kind of old rare books and everything. You don't really want the really pristine, lovely copies. You want the ones that show signs of use and abuse. You want to see the history behind them. You want to understand how people have loved them. People come into our reading room today, and we are absolutely not encouraging anybody to get the highlighter pen and underline and make annotations, but it is really great to understand something from 400 years ago, and as to how somebody would have read it at the time. Our copy, it's actually more than one copy. It's been cobbled together at some point, either in the early 19th century or possibly at the end of the 18th century. So this was quite a common practice by slightly dodgy booksellers, if you like, at the times. This book isn't a museum object. It's been something which has been read and absorbed for hundreds of years.
Well, what would it be like to be at a Shakespeare play 400 years ago? The costumes, the props, the stage effects, for example in Macbeth, the lightning. In some theatres they sold roast garlic in little bags, and people would eat the garlic, and then the smell of the garlic would be smelt by those on stage. A play like Henry VIII. I mean, Henry VIII was the play that caused the original Globe to burn down, and the reason that it burnt down was because cannons were fired. And the interesting thing I think about the First Folio is that we tend to think of it as Shakespeare and his plays, and you've got that frontispiece with his head, and Shakespeare, Mr. Shakespeare's tragedies, comedies, histories. But a number of those plays were written in collaboration, and this is becoming more and more apparent in modern scholarship too. Scholarship is increasingly thinking about Shakespeare's political place within political systems that may be problematic and may need to be questioned. So for example, the use of the First Folio as a colonial tool in the 19th century alongside the Bible from the British Empire, I think is also part of that rethinking of Shakespeare too. So the idea that the First Folio is just some benign object that's used in pleasant ways to entertain and amuse the public is also, I think, increasingly being questioned. So yes, he is a kind of chameleon, I think.
We get so many visitors to Mount Stuart who love Shakespeare. Some people have really quite an emotional experience, like actually meeting the book, the printed version. On the death of the third Marquess in 1900, the Bute First Folio then ended up in the fourth Marquess's possession, and he asked a fine bookbinder named William Pender to rebind his precious First Folio. There's not too many First Folios that are split into 3 volumes. Yeah, I think it's quite beautiful. His workmanship is stunning, and obviously the end papers with the water marbling is rather lovely. From a librarianship perspective, I find it really interesting that the connections between different books and their shared histories. Having visits like today, for example, and sharing the Bute First Folio with local school kids who are just learning about Shakespeare and kind of dipping their toe into his work and finding and exploring their own little bits of magic that are in his words. As a young person, might see it as kind of being kind of intricate language, maybe a bit difficult to understand, and then when it's presented in a different way, maybe it kind of, something magical happens and it just becomes something else entirely. and really kind of ignites your imagination and creativity. And I guess that's what we're trying to really share through this collaboration and through the display and through sharing the Bute First Folio with future generations on Bute and Argyll and Bute.